Auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I am Dr. Muhammad Anis, Associate Professor, Department of Microbiology, Kohat University of Science and Technology, Kohat. This is my lecture number 1. This is my first online lecture in the subject of research methodology. The course code is MIC 401. The topic of this lecture is research designs and types. So first we discuss the lecture outlines. In the beginning of this lecture, I will introduce to the topic and then we'll discuss the different parts of the research design. Then we'll discuss the different types of sampling designs. Then we will talk about the features of a good research design, the considerations that we should keep in our mind while preparing the research design, the different types of research design, and finally I will summarize all the lecture. Now starting with the introduction. So first of all, what is research design? In research design, this is based on arrangement of conditions that are relevant to the research purpose. And in this case, we also consider the economy of procedure in such a way that we move to collect the required data, and the required data is relevant, and that data is then used further by analyzing and interpretation procedures. So research design basically is a conceptual structure within which research is conducted. It is a blueprint for collection, measurement, and analysis of data. So as you see, there are 3 major steps: collection, then measurement, and then analysis. So it's an outline of what researcher will do right from the write-up of the hypothesis up to the final analysis of the data. So in short, it answers to many questions regarding the different decisions. For example, what we are going to do, what will be the target population, what will be the sample size, then why we are performing the research, why we are selecting a procedure, where we will get our required data, and how we will analyze the data, how we will present the data. So there are a number of decisions that are involved in designing a research, and we do all this, and we prepare a blueprint for collection, measurement, and analysis of data. So overall, it includes the outline of research right from the write-up of the hypothesis up to final data analysis. And the important thing is that the research should be relevant. Relevant means that it should answer the question actually you want. So, and secondly, you get all your data with economy. So you use minimum resources in terms of time and money. So as you see, as we discussed in the last slide, overall the research design can be divided into 4 different parts. The first thing that you have to decide is the sampling design. First of all, what is a sample? Sample, as you know, it's a small part of a population. We cannot take the whole population and analyze it. So we have to select a small part of a population. But the selection of the sample is very important. So how you're going to select the items that you would be observing and you would be analyzing it in detail, so that you get some representative data for the whole population. So this decision is very important. So this is this comes under the sampling design. The second thing is the observational design. So it relates to the conditions under which the observations are to be made. And then statistical design. As you know, we are selecting only a part of population, and then we have to analyze only the part we selected. However, we have to generalize our observations that should relate to that should answer to questions relating to the whole population. So we need an optimal statistical design. For that purpose, we have to decide how many items are to be observed, how many repeats, how many replications. So this all come under the statistical design. So we have to decide which statistical design will be optimal and which statistical design will be followed to gather information and then analysis. Finally, this is the final part of research design, that is the operational design. Operational design means that here we will actually decide the techniques by which the procedures that have been specified in the sampling, statistical, and observational design, the above three parts of the research design that can be carried out. So here we actually operationalize our research design. Now, first we come to the sampling design. As I have already discussed, that population is very big, so we cannot take all the population for analysis. So we have to take a representative part of the population and we analyze that part. That part is known as a sample. So sample should be taken with a lot of care, and this decision is very important. So whenever you go to field, or you go to select a part of population, there are some very important decisions that you have to take. For example, what will be the size of sample? So this is a very important decision. Then what will be the method of sampling? Which method of sampling you will adopt, and how you will test the samples, whether you have sufficient resources to test the number of samples you are selecting, and how many samples you will be selecting. So all these decisions come under the sampling design, and you have to decide the size, method, and test of samples well before you go to the field for selection of the sample. Now, there are different types of sampling design. You have to decide there. If we broadly categorize the sampling design, we can divide all the sampling design in two categories. One is known as probability sampling. Probability sampling means a random sampling technique. As the name indicates, it involves selection of samples without intervention of your own will, means without biasness. you select randomly, and every unit, every subject has an access and can be selected as a sample without intervention of your well. So it's a random procedure. We can divide the probability sampling into different different types. For example, there are simple random sampling. Simple random sampling means completely random. It means that all the subjects present in the population have equal chance to be selected. So in this case, there is no involvement of the biasness. There is no involvement of your own will. You cannot select a particular sample by your own will. It's all randomly done, and it's completely random. Means that all the population is considered at once, and then any of the subject can be selected, and that is known as simple random sampling. Then another type is the stratified random sampling. So as the name indicates, it is stratified. Stratified means that it is split into groups, splitting into groups. So population is split into groups by your own. You split into groups the population. You split the different subjects into different groups, and then within each group you perform random sampling. So this can be defined as a stratified random sampling. The third type of probability sampling is systemic sampling. So in this case, what you do is you take all the subjects and then you arrange them in an order, in a list. Now you have the complete list of all the subjects of a population, and then you randomly pick a number, for example n, and you pick the nth subject as a sample. So this is known as systemic sampling. So in this case, this is not something where this may not be considered completely random, because in this case, at least you decide the number of sample to be selected. So this is known as systemic sampling. Then another type is cluster random sampling. Let's suppose the population is very big and you cannot take into consideration all these sample subjects, all these subjects together. So you have to cluster them. For example, you have to sample the whole province. In this case, you have natural units that are cities. So you can select different cities as units, and within city you make random sampling. So this type of random sampling is known as cluster random sampling. Then in the final type of probability sampling is the multi-stage random sampling. In this case, you mix all the techniques. It's a kind of combination of techniques. So in the same design, you can use different sampling techniques based on your requirement. The second group of sampling techniques are the non-probability sampling. Means it is a selective kind of sampling. It doesn't involve random selection of units. So it's a non-random sampling. it it is mostly based on your judgment, and second important factor is your convenience. For example, if it is convenient to sample from your own city, so you may select your city for sampling instead of going to some other area which is far away. So either you select sampling units in a population based on your convenience or based on the judgment. Now we talk about the features of research design. Research design is a plan that is mostly unbiased and use minimal resources. So these are the features that you can say it's ideal features of a research design. So it should be unbiased, it should not involve your own decision, and it should not involve your own will, and it should not involve it should be designed in such a way that it should use minimal resources in terms of time and money, and the plan should be relevant means it should answer to all the questions that are related to your hypothesis or your research. So you have to select the sources of information and types of information that are relevant to the research problem by a technique that reduces the utilization of resources. So research design is a strategy that specifies which approach will be used for gathering and analyzing the data. So how would you be gathering the data and analyze the data? And what will be the approach? So this is a kind of strategy. And the most important thing that always limits your research are the time limits and the cost limits. These two things you always consider. Time and cost defines your resources. So minimal utilization of time and cost, and maximal amount of information you get that are relevant to research problem and answer your question, that will be a very good research design. Now, what considerations we should have in our mind when we are going to design a research? Or a research design may depend on the following things. First, the means of obtaining information. What means you have, and what skills you have. These are the two very important things. What means you have for obtaining information, and how many skills you have got, how many skilled persons you can approach, which kind of skills are available in your laboratory. Then what are the objectives you want to achieve, and finally what is the nature of the problem to be studied. So these are the four major considerations that should be kept in mind while designing a research. And finally, the time and money you have. So that, of course, if you have limited amount of time or money, accordingly you will design your research so that all the objectives could be achieved within the given time and within the given resources. So finally, I summarize the lecture. Here we discussed about the research design, which is a framework of research study, which starts from hypothesis creation and it goes till data analysis. So hypothesis creation means what you want to achieve, what is your basic hunch, and what is your basic question. So once you have the question, you design it accordingly, and then stepwise you move to data retrieval and data interpretation. Now, during this process, you have to decide many things. You have to decide the samples, you have to decide the sampling design, you have to decide from where these samples should be obtained, what will be the size of sample, where the samples will be analyzed, what kind of uh, what kind of parameters will be measured, in which laboratories the measurement will be done, and then how the data will be organized and then analyzed, and finally how the data will be analyzed and presented, which kind of report will be the result of this research. So this is a complete blueprint of all the work that needs to be done. Then we discussed the parts of the research design. We discussed that overall we can divide our research design into 4 different parts. So when we prepare a research design, we are preparing 4 things. We prepare a sampling design, then we prepare the observational design and statistical design. So these are 3 major parts that we do: sampling design, observational design, and statistical design. And final part is to operationalize all these 3 things, all these 3 parts, and this make our research design. Then we discussed in detail the sample design, which is of course the most important one when you are going to perform a research. So in this case, we have 2 options based on our objective. One is probability sampling and other one is non-probability sampling. Probability sampling means that you are going to sample something out of the population that is completely an unbiased decision. I mean, your will is not involved in selection of that sample, and you select the sample without involvement of your biasness. So there are different techniques in which you can perform the probability sampling. And then non-probability sampling means that it involves your will, your decision. So it involves the convenience and judgment from your side. Then we discussed the features of a research design, and one thing is very important, that a good research design is unbiased. It retrieves maximal amount of data with relevance and minimal utilization of resources. So these are very important. So you use minimum amount of time, you use minimum amount of money to retrieve a good amount of data, a quality data that can be used to answer your question and that is relevant in terms that your question that actually you posed is answered at the end. So then finally we discussed the different considerations, which include the means that you have, the skills you have to, and thirdly the money and the time you have. So all these considerations you keep in mind and prepare your research design. So here we stop. Thank you very much.